What'd you forget?
Those certificates of appreciation. This is the first meeting where we're all actually going to be here together. I have them printed on nice brown paper in color. And they're sitting in up there for Ray, Kirsty, and Julie. How are you doing? Good. Good.
Hey. Hey, dude.
Mr. Foley?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Hey, I got a time off request. You know.
Yeah, Julie's slowly been updating. Hi. Hi.
We were very, very disappointed when your dad showed up last time and you guys were not here. We told him that our favorite part of him having any kind of permitting work with the city is you guys coming to the meeting, so we're probably gonna make that a contingency going forward if you guys are good with that.
Thank you guys helped a lot.
She says she's half a mile from the exit. Cool.
Okay.
Should we scurry the police out for an escort then?
I missed a CCTV show one time because traffic was backed up and I felt so bad about it that I felt inclined to send pictures for proof. Like, I really am stuck on the interstate. Because I really was very stuck on the interstate.
So you add texting and driving to the being late?
What's that?
You added texting and driving in addition to being late?
I put my car in park each and every time.
Turned off the ignition, took the keys out.
Through them.
Do you, are these helpful to you? I know it's for city dates.
Sure. It's always good. So then I'm not guessing as to spellings and things, because there's no.
I don't think it's anything you don't necessarily know about.
Set up product placement right for the camera.
Yeah.
Sticker.
I did this before that. I should probably do that. Huh?
It's just
Since we're doing a whole
random
list,
sticker
why
that happens
why
to be
does
on there.
that
It's like a revolving spot now, you know.
I know, you really
It's a way to advertise.
Start to capitalize on it, you know?
This discussion makes me think of Sweet Sound Oysters from Redford, Massachusetts.
You advertise
Are
it?
they delicious?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's somewhere in the conflict of.
It's like boxers did it. If you have a tattoo or something, you can't really say much, so maybe you could do like.
What was the goldenpalace.com?
Yeah. Yeah, remember when that was the thing?
Yeah.
Like first,
Early-
boxing.
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, there's three of us.
Yeah, we'll
We'll rock and roll. Okay. Yeah. That's French names. Okay, so being 6 o'clock on Monday, May the 15th, we'll call to order the City of Winooski Liquor Control Board meeting. Just as a reminder, we'll open tonight with Liquor Control Board, and then immediately after, we'll also follow with the Winooski City Council meeting. So first, we'll ask that everybody please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Deputy Mayor Mr. Brian Corrigan.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Who likes to make an entrance? Yeah, the filler stuff in it too. Yeah. Okay, so we have 4 items on for tonight's agenda, and all are related to the Jazz Festival. So we'll open up the 4 items and start with McKee's Enterprise, 19 East Allen, request for entertainment permits. They're not quite in order here, but that's okay. Or I'll tell you what, is there enough unique here that we need to take them individually, or do you want to take them all as one? So if we would just want to talk through what the Jazz Fest is.
Sure. So the Discover Jazz Fest has traditionally been a Burlington-based event. It's happening from June 2nd to 11th this year. This year, a group of local restaurants and entrepreneurs got together and decided to try and pull Jazz Fest over the river a little bit in Winooski. So that is happening. There will be 10 different locations during that week that have jazz here in Winooski, including the first of the first Wednesday concerts in Rotary Park that will feature a jazz band. So these are the entertainment permits needed as part of the DLC permitting process for those locations that will be hosting Discover Jazz Fest events as part of the greater area event. I will say, and we'll say here instead of later in city updates, that this has, working with Heather and the business community, has created a little bit of a permitting issue for us, because there are going to be jazz, there's going to be jazz music at places that aren't serving alcohol, so it creates a bit of a hole in our process. So we are looking to update that with the WCP and other community partners. But for now, these are very typical approvals for hosting jazz as part of a citywide festival. There are no street closures, there are no other associated permits, so it hasn't gone through the regular event permitting process. And Heather, please feel free to jump in.
Well, I permitted the 2 things that are held on city property. So those 2 have gone through the regular permitting process, one of them being the Winooski Wednesdays, which was approved administratively because we don't expect that it'll be over 200 people there, no street closures. And stay tuned on that. If we find that it's more, we'll bring it to council. And the other is a jazz quartet that's going to be playing on Riverwalk as part of this. So those 2 are permitted.
Great. Awesome, exciting, great to welcome it. Thanks for all the work of staff and of course of the business owners who I'm sure see this as a great opportunity. So thanks for your work to support it and support the action. Are there questions for, I don't think any of these places are new in terms of permitting, so I think we're pretty familiar probably with what the process looks like for each of them.
Yep.
Any questions, concerns from Liquor Control Board? Any questions, comments, concerns from the public? Great. So seeing and hearing none, I would entertain a motion for approval of the 4 event permits listed for McKee's, Mule Bar, Misery Loves Company, and Four Quarters Brewing for permits related to entertainment for Jazz Festival.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Hope it's a great time. All right. So we'll now call to order the Winooski City Council meeting.
To adjourn.
Oh, excuse me, pardon me. With that concludes the business of the Liquor Control Board. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Sweeney, second by Brian Corrigan. Any further discussion? Hearing, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, Liquor Control Commission is adjourned. Now we'll call to order the Winooski City Council meeting of Monday, May the 15th, being 6:05. And we will ask once again that everybody please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Deputy Mayor Brian Corrigan.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first up today we have agenda review. And we do have an item to address for agenda review.
Yes. I respectfully request that you add at the end, so an O to your agenda, to read a discussion of the allocation of TIF reserves to fund paver installation at city lights.
Great. And so this is something that's come up very suddenly and needs to be addressed in short order. So it is coming on as a discussion
Yes.
for tonight and not an action item. So this will qualify it as its discussion, and then it could be action at a subsequent meeting. Any concerns with that from council?
No.
Okay. So seeing and hearing none, we haven't taken action on these in the past. We've just heard concerns, and if there isn't, then we'll just add that to the agenda and move forward with it without a vote. Okay. Next up, anything else in terms of agenda review? I think everything else has been thoughtfully placed due to high volume and guests, what we also have today too. Okay, so seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the city council about any items that are not on tonight's agenda. Great opportunity to remind you there is an agenda in the back if you're curious about what's on tonight's agenda. And we'd also ask that guests please remember to also sign in for us. We appreciate that as well. And it's okay if you do it on the way out as long as you remember. Anything for public comment today for an item that's not on tonight's agenda? Yes, George. Please feel
I'll be
free.
quick, so I can go from right here.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the council again. 2 or 3 meetings ago, I came and made a short presentation to you about the permit fee for ones repairing their sewer lines in the street. At the time I paid the fee for the repair I had to do at my house, which was $641.73. That represents 35% of the cost of the repair. I don't have to point out to you that if you're going to build a $300,000 structure in Winooski, and that was the permit rate, it would cost you over $100,000 for the permit to build that structure. At the time, I presented to you information about the permit fees in other communities in the area and demonstrated the degree to which Winooski's was out of whack with everyone else's. I also at that time asked a variety of questions, one of which was that you rebate a portion of my fee that I paid, given the outrageous nature of the fee. I haven't heard anything from you, so I'm here tonight to ask 2 questions. 1, have you discussed this, or will you discuss it? And 2, when? Or, if you have discussed it and made a decision, when can I expect my check? Thank you.
Thank you, George. So I think what we've done is functionally put this back into review for any other fee. So we haven't taken any formal action from this body standpoint. Quite frankly, that's something that we would ask staff to take a look at to ensure that it's within reason and within rhyme. We're working on fee chapters now. Yeah, please.
So at Mr. Cross's recommendation, we did go back and look at those fees as compared to other communities, and the Public Works Commission just last week took this up and looked at the bonding requirements that most other communities face, and the recommendation from the commission was to continue down that path. So that is, I think at this point, pending some more research on staff's side, what we will be bringing to you. We will be bringing that fee chapter to you June 19th, which is after the other Public Safety Commission and the Planning Commission have time to review their sections of that fee chapter as well.
Okay.
So basically, the answer to my question is the council has not discussed it and has no intention of discussing it.
No, I think that there's been a lot of work done on staff's behalf, and the proposal went to the Public Works folks. Could you speak to what you mean by the bonding piece, just so there's the difference is understood?
Well, I'm not interested tonight in the details. I'll deal with that when you bring that before the council.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in tonight as to whether the council will in fact discuss a rebate of a portion of my fee or not.
I'll speak from my behalf. Number one, when fees are set, they're applied evenly to residents. That's the idea. If we don't know what the proposed change would be, I don't even know what we would start to begin to think about in terms of what a rebate would even look like. The answer to that is I don't even think we would have enough information to do that until that process is unfolded and we had an idea what that looks like. Even still, that's not really an action that this body takes. That's within the purview of the city. There's a outlet for you that does not include coming to council as the arbiter. There's a legal route to dispute a fee.
Winooski citizens should not have to go through court action to seek a rebate of an outlandish fee.
Mm-hmm.
I rest my case.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other items for public comment? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. On tonight's consent agenda, we have 5 items. Let's see. What do we need to parse out? Anything? Everybody here for the first? Everybody's here for the last round? I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Nicole
Was not.
Right, who's not present, so we can take the whole consent agenda as a full slate? Okay. All right, so we have 5 items on for tonight. We have approval of the City Council liquor control minutes of May 1st, 2017. We have the payroll warrant from 4/23 to 5/6/2017. Also accounts payable from 5/12/2017. We have approval of the Vermont Student Assistance Corporation parking agreement, which was covered in the previous meeting. We have the master sublease agreement for CHF and the master sublease agreement also for CHF, one for Champlain College and one for UVM. And a reminder, CHF in terms of an acronym is for Collegiate Housing Foundation. So again, items that were reviewed last time, typically in the past, there hasn't been a formal approval on those leases. The mayor's gone forward with signing off, but we put them in the package for approval this time around. I think that's a good policy going forward too. So with that, I would entertain if there's any questions regarding the consent agenda. So seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Brian Sweeney. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Consent agenda is approved as presented. City update.
Thank you. I have a handful of things today. It's been a busy couple of weeks in the city. So first I want to start by thanking Paul Sarn for stewarding the This Is Vermont hashtag through the Waking Windows weekend, which was awesome. You can go back through that feed and look at it. He got a lot of kudos from the Department of Tourism for running that. Similarly, Waking Windows was a big effort, so thanks to the police and Public Works and Code and really all the staff who were here for most of the weekend and really enabled a very peaceful and calm event, and of course in partnership with WCP and the Waking Windows folks themselves. Same weekend was Green Up Day. We picked up a lot of trash, so thank you to Ray and Peter and the crews for managing that. It's also been quite an eventful fire public safety week, couple of weeks. So 3 or 4, depending how you look at it, significant events to call your attention to. The Mill Yard condo fires, which was early morning, the night of the 5th. Last Friday's fire at 35 Platt Street. And then over the weekend, we provided mutual aid to the 55-foot boat fire in Mallett's Bay as well. So those 3 incidents were, no life was lost. They were, in terms of public safety, pretty successful in maintaining the public safety. And specifically for the first 2, really demonstrate our successful regulatory environment where smoke detectors were activated, sprinkler systems were activated, and really prevented the significant loss of property and life. So pretty proud of that. Today we had a gas leak at City Lights, so you may have heard or gotten the Nixle alert that the street was closed for a period of time. It's all repaired and back on, but you may see our lovely John Audie on WCAX this evening. We already talked about Discover Jazz Fest. Just a quick announcement that the RFP for the community funding is out on the street. That's due May 30th. We got
study area that's a quarter mile long. So we wanted to look block by block and see where utilization and adequacy as well. If you look at block number 13, the numbers that you're seeing across the number of available spaces that we counted between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Every even hour on a typically busy October weekday here. Where you see the red numbers here, these are places where we saw individual blocks that had exceeded 85% of occupancy. And within the parking industry, this is sort of a magic number because it is when that block starts to become perceived as full, even if there are a few remaining available spaces. So we wanted to identify if there were those areas where things were starting to get very tight. That's where you will most often have complaints that there's simply not enough parking to go around. And what you're really looking for when you do this type of analysis is you're looking for clusters of blocks that are bonded together that have a shortfall in parking. It's not unusual in an urban environment to have one block that simply doesn't have enough parking or is completely maxed out, but usually they're surrounded by other blocks that have some availability as well. This is because when you build in an urban framework here, you can't necessarily put a chicken in for every pot, for lack of a better analogy right now, but you can't site enough parking on every parcel and still have the kind of density that you're looking for. So it's not unusual to strategically build a supply like you've done with the garage that allows you to then build up to maximum capacity in the surrounding parcels here. What we want to see is if there's a cluster of blocks that are all together where we're running a shortfall, that's most likely where you're going to truly have an issue, either now or going forward. When we looked at the weekend, and I'm going to blow through these, it was basically the same story, only less utilization for the most part. So a lot of our analysis really focused on the weekday because that is where the greatest concern was communicated to us when we talked to stakeholders, and it's the highest level of utilization. So it's potentially the place where you are most endangered when you talk about future development. And again, we're finding the same findings here. We're seeing individual blocks where you may be very tight, but not necessarily clusters of blocks where the level of utilization would indicate that immediate action is required. When we talk about emerging developments, we had identified a number of them sitting and talking with city staff. One of the things that was identified that would be Block B, or parcel B here, is the potential reconfiguration or redevelopment of the City Hall site. And we didn't necessarily assume a lot of new demand associated with that, but there may be an opportunity in that development here to introduce new supply if it's necessary. Certainly the Strand, which is shown as number C, and the required parking lots, A and D on that, were part of our consideration here. VSAC, the VSAC building, which our understanding was about 122,000 square feet of office space, of which about 41,000 was reported vacant at the time that we're doing our counts, was certainly consideration. And we wanted to understand what would happen when that parcel leased up and reached full occupancy. City Lights, which was under construction at the time, was also on our radar. Parcel D, which is shown as H on that, again, is a little bit of a question mark. We know that there is some parking supply there. We know that there's some parking utilization and demand there. We did not necessarily have a clear idea of what might go there in the future, although we know that it has been slated for development at some point. But we did look at it, again, as a potential site. If you have to introduce supply in the area, that's a potential site to do it as you talk about redevelopment of that parcel. Spinner Place was another one that was identified. The current equity investors here have indicated to us that they may be looking at changing their business model slightly in the future, and we wanted to understand what that impact might have in the future. In addition, they have been a strong partner to the city, and we wanted to understand what that change might mean to the community here as they went forward. Champlain Mills, My Web Grocer, has about 40,000 square feet of vacant space sitting in it right now. Our understanding was that when that went into development, up to 32,500 square feet of that may go into office. The other 7,500 we assumed could go into a high-end restaurant as well. And then finally, you have the hotel pad. And we also considered that in our calculations, although our understanding is that has an agreement in place for dedicated shared parking arrangement outside the study area. But conservatively, we wanted to factor that into our calculations. So the big question that's been in front of us since we started this last fall was, how do we deal with future demand? And Winooski is really at a fork in the road. Your past approach has really been what we like to call a provision approach. It is providing enough parking in order to incent development moving forward, and making sure that every stakeholder has some dedicated parking in order to support their development. That amount may be based on peak individual need for an individual development or project. It may be based on a zoning requirement, or it may be based on market expectation. This is what we have to have in order to get this property leased up or filled up here. This type of approach is almost always, any type of issue is resolved by building out of it, creating more infrastructure so that you've got adequate supply to meet every need as the market changes. This is a very competitive way to position your city relative to competing communities in the area here, but as you well know, it's also very expensive in order to do that kind of development. And in point of fact, it's almost unsustainable in the long term. There isn't a municipality in America that has enough land as it starts to grow up and densify to continue to be able to do this. Sooner or later, they all have to look at going over the other model. And the other model is accommodation. That's taking a look at what you have available within your area and trying to make the most of every parking space. The whole idea behind accommodation is that your stakeholders are sharing a common supply and you're managing that common supply to get the maximum efficiency out of it. When you look at accommodating some development, you're really looking at shared use and what's the capacity in the facility relative, or capacity within the system relative to the other users or demands that are on it right now. That's based on actual utilization, going out and actually observing how these land uses work in the real world and transferring that projection onto whatever you're proposing to bring into your downtown. And again, this is a foundation based on empirical data. It's not something where somebody's coming in saying, well, I think we might need this. It's something where that land use has been studied and it's been established that it typically always needs a certain ratio of parking spaces to square footage or some other driver to make sure that there is enough parking. This is heavily management intensive here. So while you're not building your way out, you are managing your way out. It requires a tremendous amount of communication. It requires a tremendous amount of collaboration between all the different stakeholders within the community in order to make this work. It's more economical. It's also far more labor intensive. And it is a more sustainable model, but only if you have the community's backing and support. If you don't have their backing and support, it will not sustain going forward. So the reason that I bring this up is when we first came in and started looking at the commitments that are placed on your 916 space garage, There are 4 that are clearly documented fixed obligations for X number of spaces depending on time of day or day of week here. In addition, you have agreements in principle here with 2 other players to accommodate them. And when we started actually putting these numbers on paper and comparing them to the capacity within the garage, can you go to the next slide? What we found was you're in an unsupportable position right now. There is actually more commitments out there than there are available spaces here as you start to look at it. And we identified 6 p.m. at weekday as your biggest crunch hour. You're only coming up about 12 spaces short during most of the day, but if you have a performance at the Strand at 6, kicking off at 6 o'clock, that shortfall is going to be significantly magnified. Now, it's going to be a rare occasion, but potentially it is something that could occur. On the weekends, again, when you start looking at the commitments that have been placed in the garage, there is the potential for shortfall. Now, I need to preface this by saying this is a shortfall on paper. In order to assume that this is going to turn into an actual problem in your downtown, you have to assume that every one of the numbers that's on there is correct, that that's what's actually being utilized and that's what's going to be actually required going forward. And this is why I bring up the question of market requirement versus zoning versus empirical-based projections. Can we go to the next slide? These are the zoning requirements as we understand them that are currently on your books here in Winooski here. As we understand it, there's really 3 general requirements. There is a set of requirements for greater Winooski, and then within Winooski, you have an overlay zone, which is the downtown core requirements. And then a further reduction on that are adjusted requirements for shared use for any individual or development that is going to use part of the garage in order to make their requirements. When you start looking at these side by side, I'm sorry, there's one more school of thought I need to go through, which is the school of thought that my industry tends to use here. It's called shared parking methodology. It was developed by the International Council of Shopping Centers and the Urban Land Institute, and it's based on empirical research. Somebody like me has gone out into parking lots all over America and counted cars associated with different developments at different times of day, different times of year, studied that extensively and tried to establish what the relationship is between parking demand and a particular building, which is typically expressed in a demand ratio. And these studies are performed on live land uses and established along an 85th percentile standard. This is, I'm going to get a little bit wonky here, bear with me, I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. If you look at the full range of a data sample, the 85th percentile would essentially be at that 85th percent level at that full range. What that means from pragmatic standpoint is you're throwing out the very top 1 or 2 pieces in the sample as being complete anomalies, and you're looking at the full range and saying about 15% of what we've observed anywhere within this body fall above this range, 85% fall below. In vernacular terms, it's the same thing that traffic engineers do when they do roadway design, and the idea with using that 85th percentile is the conditions that are likely to occur that will exceed that 85th percentile are going to occur only in a very limited number of occasions or in only a very limited number of locations. To put it in academic terms, you're designing your road to an A- as opposed to an A+. We took a look at the requirements on the garage from these 3 different perspectives. We have the market standard. This is the standard that was reported to us when we talked to the stakeholders. For example, VSAC has rights to 350 parking spaces right now. When we spoke to them, they said, we have about 41,000 square feet of empty space right now. We're going to need about 200 additional parking spaces in order to lease that out and get somebody in here. When you look at that ratio, of parking spaces to every 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, it works out to be something in the order of 4.32 to 4.88 spaces per 1,000 square feet. Now you compare that to the zoning requirement. The zoning requirement is requiring a 2.88 space per 1,000 square feet. And then you take a look at it using the shared use methodology here, and our best calculation is actual demand based on what we saw in the field in October is closer to about 2 spaces per 1,000. Every one of these projections has validity. The market standard has validity within the market. You have brokers out there that will tell you you have to have this in order to make this property move. The zoning requirement certainly has validity. This council has helped vote that through. It is the law of the city. And the projections have validity because they're based on what we've actually seen working in community here, and they're based on a model that was developed in part by how your parking supply is currently utilized. So every one of them is valid. I can't speak to the market standard except to tell you that from my professional experience, the market standard is very rarely equivalent to actual utilization or use. It may be what tenants believe they need to have in order to sign a lease. It isn't necessarily what you need to have in order to make a project work. Municipalities do, from time to time, agree that they're going to move forward and support the market standard. It is a policy decision going forward. It is not a policy decision that at this point in time I can advocate for, simply because I can't point to any type of empirical data that supports that. I will tell you, looking at the modeling exercise that we did and the modeling and the zoning requirements that you have in the books, there is a significant amount of agreement between them, which is commendable. I've worked in communities where zoning requirements have been plucked out of clear air. These seem to be based on some sort of empirical study and actual utilization as well. The one thing that is a little bit of an anomaly is we're taking a look at the comparison is there did not appear to be any type of zoning for CCV. So that doesn't necessarily make it into the calculation. If you assume that CCV's actual use is about 200 spaces, it's not 861 spaces for a 916 space garage. It is 1061. But either way, our best projection was when all of these facilities that have claim on the garage right now are leased out, you do have a potential need on a very busy weekday for up to 1,818 spaces against a garage that's only 916 spaces full. That said, you also have other resources that are in that immediate area to correct that potential shortfall. Our understanding is that one of the stakeholders has rights to up to 100 parking spaces in the adjacent Keenes Crossing garage. That's one of the access-controlled garages. We can tell you from walking through and doing counts that there is some availability there. So some of that potential shortfall could be mitigated. There are also 98 surface parking spaces in all of these blocks that make up all of these stakeholders as well that also have the ability to absorb that overrun. So while the garage may be to some degree overbooked, the area can support this demand going forward if it's effectively managed. Using the modeling that we had put together here, we took a look at our projection for peak hour, assuming that all of these projects had come in and were operating at full capacity. And what you see is this heat mapping up here, which again, it allows us at a glance to take a look and say, where do we think that we have issues? And clearly, if you look at the middle, you have a series of contiguous blocks that have significant shortfall right next to each other. These are the areas that we would be most concerned about going forward. And at the recommendation of the stakeholders we met with, we actually looked at this slightly different because this is less than intuitive. So we organized it according to their recommendation and basically broke it into a series of zones. The zone to the far right in blue is all of the blocks that are to the east of the traffic circle and have some sort of claim or use on the public garage, plus a significant amount of private supply within the area here. We grouped blocks 3 and 4 together because we've got the Strand on one, and we've got the parking that the Strand is going to be developing on the adjacent block, and we wanted to see how those two balanced out. We grouped 6, 7, 8, and 23 together because they're on the far western side of the development, the project area. They are primarily residential, and we wanted to understand what the interplay between those are. We grouped 20 and 22 together because basically that's the woolen mills. They're the only ones who have access to that supply. They're the only ones who are generating demand on those blocks. What that left is this core in the middle, made up of blocks 5, 9, 10, 11, 18, 19, and 21. Those are those very densely developed blocks just to the west side of the traffic circle. And we project that there is a significant potential issue there with full development and absorption in the future here of up to 54 spaces. So if I was to point to this as your consultant today and tell you there's an issue here, that's the area that I'm going to point to and tell you that you may have to build your way out of that issue if you can't manage your way out of that issue.
I have a question. Are those labels correct? Is it supply, demand, balance? It seems like it doesn't add up to me. Like, there's a balance of 424.
I think
and
that's
the demand, does the demand exceed the supply by 424? Or is it?
No, I just mislabeled that.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
That
so
is,
the only one where
that's
there's a
consultant error
deficit-
right there.
The only one where there's a deficit is the light blue.
That's yes, that is correct. No, that's what you get for working late on a Sunday.
I appreciate that.
So, before this council, we've tried to present a number of different options that you have. And certainly one of the options that you have is to build your way out of this. Our best projection is you may have to build something in the future here as you start to talk about this development all coming to fruition here. And we had identified 3 potential areas where you could introduce a significant amount of supply in order to address issues going forward here. Those cost estimates are included within the proposal, as are schematic markups of what each one of these parcels could potentially support. Another option that's available to you is to augment supply through shared parking. This is creating arrangements between 2 collaborative users in order to make the most of an existing asset. You have a hotel developer who's looking to develop the pad right next to the Champlain Mills, who's reached out to an area church that doesn't necessarily have need of the parking that's in front of it here during the hours that the hotel does need the available parking. It's a classic example of a shared use agreement here. You see these in growing municipalities who have finally reached a point where they've decided they can't build their way out of something at $17,000, $25,000, $35,000, $50,000 a space, and they need to make maximum use over the capacity they've got. It is the sustainable road to go down. It's smart management, but it is management, and it's very intensive. In order to make this kind of solution work, you need to have a manager that is on city staff who can help broker these agreements, who can go out to the individual property owners, identify who's got some availability and under what conditions they would be willing to make that availability, and then match them up with the right partner. Mitigating demand is always an option, and you have a number of resources in the area that specialize in introducing programs that are aimed at getting folks out of single occupant vehicles and into some other mode of transportation that's less parking intensive here. And we've spent some time talking about how that might be achieved as well. The one caveat I will tell you is these work most effectively when you're talking about large groups of homogeneous people, which is to say colleges, universities, hospitals, major employers. Those are the ones that you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And then variety is also key. Next slide. Our recommendations at this point in time are, one, to start moving away from a policy of parking provision and start moving toward a policy of accommodation, making the most of what you've got. I'm not telling you to never build another parking space. I'm telling you to maximize the assets that you've got right now before you start putting a shovel to the earth. That includes seeking out these shared parking opportunities wherever you can find them to address some of the immediate issues and shortfalls. We had identified some service improvements that could occur. Certainly one of the things that could occur is putting in some signage within the garage that's going to make that more user-friendly here. Our understanding is the garage does see a very high level of utilization, but the repeat users, I will tell you, driving into the garage for the first time as an out-of-towner here, it is a very challenging environment. When you first come in, you don't necessarily know where you're supposed to park as a member of the general public, and if you spin up a couple of levels, your garage is very well hidden from public view, which is a benefit from an aesthetic standpoint and a real detriment when it comes to actual utilization, because you don't necessarily know what street you're fronting when you get out of your vehicle. So some simple improvements in signage will make that more attractive and may be able to help boost some of that utilization. Number one thing you have to have if you're going to manage your way out of this is somebody to manage it. And so we're recommending the city retain a parking and transportation coordinator to be that individual and that resource to manage the system, to go out to private partners and try and broker some of these deals, and to be the voice for parking in downtown Winooski here. We also recommend installing some sort of technology into the garage in order to better manage the current utilization. One of the biggest questions that you have with some of the stakeholders who are using the garage right now is what the level of utilization actually is. And there is no unimpeachable third-party audit line of information that you can point to right now that everybody can agree to. You have our counts, and you have a lot of anecdotal information. Putting in some simple technology that tells you who's in the garage, when, and how utilized it is will certainly help with some of those discussions going forward, because everybody is going to have the same database to work off of. And once you've exhausted all of this and you have a very clear idea of how your system is being utilized, that's the time to start looking at options to increase the public supply strategically to either address current issues or proactively address the issues you expect to come up against in the future. And thank you very much.
Awesome. So, everybody got all that?
There will be a quiz.
For your reading pleasure, I just want to point out too that aside from the presentation we received tonight, in the public package is the full 100+ page report, which is actually a great read. I mean, it really is pretty accessible. I mean, there's some times where it gets down into the weeds on, you know, appropriate parking ratios, etc. But really encourage folks from the public to take a look at that. It's a pretty accessible document. Just encourage you to make sure you look through the whole thing, because if you pick up one page, you can walk away with a resolution that may have not been where we arrived at today in terms of recommendations and full state. So we'd like to open it up for questions first from council. We'll have an opportunity for public too to put a couple guardrails on it. I think really important to remember this is a parking study that is addressing, you know, primarily downtown. Important we don't get into specifics about projects and contracts. You know, keep it kind of general in that way, shape and form, and from a, you know, how many, you know, what negotiations would look like with one business or the other. This isn't the place and space for that, but obviously a lot to explore and talk about here. So I want to open it up first for council, and then we'll also open it up for public questions too. So let's kick it off. Please.
I thought this was a very, you know, comprehensive, thorough analysis. I'm interested in the stakeholder meeting and generally, not necessarily the details of that discussion, but how did that go with respect to some of the recommendations and analysis? Were you present for the meeting also?
Yes,
ma'am.
I was sort of the central
The
attraction.
star. That'd be perfect. Held them captive
Excellent.
attention for 2
Excellent.
hours. It was
Excellent.
impressive.
There was a mixed response. There are certain stakeholders that very much subscribe to a kind of a market mindset and are going to tell you straight up they're not going to be able to move space if they cannot make the kind of accommodations that are being made in neighboring communities where you can build a lot of parking very cheaply to go along with vacant space here. We had some folks who were very much a champion of the idea of shared parking. I would say one of the takeaways was there were some challenges to the methodology and the modeling that we used. We have committed, if there is information presented to us that shows that we've made a calculation error, we've committed to revising our calculations going forward. And we have requested from those folks who were dissatisfied with that to provide us with that information, and we remain open to receiving that. Short of that, we stand by our calculations. Again, we believe that empirical approach is the best approach. Overall, there seemed to be some interest in the idea of shared use. Everybody kind of acknowledged that's to some degree already happening anyhow, so formalizing it seems like a good way to go. And everybody seemed to like the idea of having better communication and somebody who could be appointed within the city to really actively manage the system. And be able to provide some clear analysis and data for decision-making going forward.
And if I can just add to that a little bit, this is a great summary, very accurate. I think that it was a 2-hour discussion sitting around your table. People were very engaged. I take that as a very positive sign that the stakeholders, very high level people in our community were willing to sit down and talk for 2 hours about options and coming to solutions together. As Andy alluded to, there was some questioning of the data, which I think is very appropriate and will help everyone understand it better. I think while there might be still some frustration with the numbers, I came away with the sense that people were willing to continue a conversation about shared solutions, which I take as very positive. I think there is some concern that the stakeholders do have existing contracts that are not due to be renewed in the next couple of years, and were built around a former investment, and there's some hesitancy to undo that investment and that commitment, but I think still a willingness to talk.
From a shared use perspective, is it important that in a facility like that the buy-in is 100%? Or have we seen evidence of it working incrementally with percentages of space holders?
The more buy-in you get, the more flexibility you get, the better efficiency you have. So the answer to your question is you can make it work with a smaller number of folks. And sometimes that is the gateway. You have to prove that you can make it work with a couple of different parties on one occasion first before the other parties will relax and buy in. But the more players that you've got who can participate, the better efficiency and utilization you're going to have.
Yeah. So I think it's been interesting and eye-opening because, in a lot of ways we've talked about the fact that we've had, I'll say very bluntly, difficulty managing our way out of this problem, but that's because we're managing contracts. And I think the argument here, the iconoclast approach is, no contracts or different contracts. Could you talk a little bit about, because we're looking at this as the business owners holding, or certain entities holding blocks of spaces. Part of the thinking behind the contracts when the TIF was also created was to create a steady line of repayment ability. And that financing hinged on a certain amount of payback from spaces. Is there an industry expectation in terms of what percentage of income a shared space might derive versus contracted use space?
Yeah, when we've done this calculation in the past, and most recently we kind of walked through the same exercise of Bristol, Connecticut here. what we first take a look at is what's the value of that space in and of itself. You're gonna build that space at $25,000 or whatever the incremental cost is, and that's going to turn into an annual debt service of $2,000. And then your operating expense on top of that's another $400, so $2,400 a year per space. If you've dedicated that exclusively to one user, you've got to be able to recoup all of that back out. Or you've got to figure out what the municipality is going to subsidize of that $2,400, and then the rest essentially falls on that private developer who has exclusive rights to that. When they open it up for shared use, and you have the ability to collect revenue on that shared use, you now have the ability to start changing that math a little bit, because there are other people who are also helping to subsidize or pay for that. And so the split, if you will, on that cost starts to become significantly different depending on the level of activity that you're looking at. We have structured deals where we've done this type of calculation where it's a graduated rate. So private developer may come in and pay the lion's share initially, but they've entered into shared use agreements that as they mature and come due here, their contribution gets less and less as other folks are using those spaces during the off hours and paying for them more and more. As far as what a rule of thumb is, every municipality has to make that decision for themselves based on what their financing is in place to pay for this and how much of a subsidy they can provide, and then what your project cost is.
So Angela has to give us permission. Are there a lot of examples that exist of situations where there has been a shift from, I can see if this is an upfront conversation, a really clear path. What about conversions? Are there a lot of examples out there of municipalities that have changed from a contract situation to a shared use?
Yes. This is, like I said, this is an evolutionary process, and you guys are kind of dead in the middle of it right now. There are a lot of municipalities who have gone through this. And the models for dealing with it are widely divergent, but all of them have basically three identical elements in all of them. One of them is data. You have a lot of data to back up whatever your policy change, your policy shift is. You have very good communication, and you have some sort of supplemental or support programs to back up this change. So if things start to go a little bit of haywire, you have satellite parking with a shuttle back and forth that you can put into action very quickly to accommodate some sort of disruption in service. Or you're doing this in tandem with a very aggressive transportation demand management program so that there are other resources to folks so that as they're making this change, there are safety nets that make it a little less scary.
I'm having questions.
Have you seen in what some of the biggest pratfalls of that transition process have been in previous areas? What are some areas that people get really hung up on in making the transition from market-based to shared?
Yeah, and I'd say probably the last recession was a prime example of this, because when times are good, it is a lot easier to say we're offering a very unique product in a very unique area. You're not going to be able to get this in surrounding areas, and to convince tenants to come on in, sometimes at a slightly higher price point, because they're buying into a lot of vibrancy. And they're willing to give up a little bit of parking. They might be willing to pay a little bit higher on a per square foot basis because they're coming into a really unique market. If that market goes down, the math starts to get very economic at that point, and it really is, what can I get for the dollars that I'm willing to spend? And it's very hard to compete with a suburban office park who can build spec office space much cheaper, or spec retail space or commercial space, whatever it might be, and they can build the parking much cheaper and far more abundantly here. It is very inexpensive to plow under a field and put asphalt on it, relative to having to do structured parking in a downtown environment. So yeah, it can go really wrong. And that's where you have to have management and to some degree some flexibility to be able to say, we've had a change in course and we're going to adjust our course right now until conditions improve to make this kind of move.
What's the experience or norm in municipalities in terms of having full-time staff on staff versus contracting with a parking management company that has expertise in these issues?
I've seen communities go both ways. The benefit that you have if you bring somebody from the outside as your designated manager is very often they're coming in with a lot of experience, and they also have the backing of a firm that specializes in something like that. They have a lot of tools in the tool bag already. The downside that you often get is these folks are not familiar with the community, and if they're really good, unfortunately, you're probably only going to be able to hold on to them for a few years, and chances are they're either going to get promoted or they're going to get transferred to another market. When you can grow your folks in-house, the process may be a little slower. They're not necessarily coming in with the same toolkit, although the industry has a lot of options now for folks to get a very good, thorough education very quickly in parking and transportation demand management. But they know the community, they know the players. It's easier for them to get through the door. It's easier, especially here in New England, to get folks to talk to you because they know who you are, and they create roots in the community, which means that you have some consistency of leadership going forward as well. I will tell you that the calculus that is most often applied is cost. What does it cost to us to have these folks on city staff versus what does it cost to have them in as a contractor? And the most common model I've seen, to be real honest, is folks who hire a contractor for a couple of years, decide they really like them, and bring them on as city staff.
Can you talk a little bit on the shared use side and just generally, not so much in this presentation, but there's a lot of functional solutions and technological investments included in here? Not a lot, but a few. One of the things might be a little knee-jerk scared of is the mention of the word gate, which we fought hard to remove because we had a lot of complaints about it. So it was interesting to see that. I was curious, was it the gate itself that you thought proposed a solution, or was it the idea of the reading of plates and the...
Yeah, to be real honest, it doesn't have to be a gate. Yeah. There are other mechanisms that get you that information. Mm-hmm. It is just the most common type of technology that our folks have seen, and the most ubiquitous. It's also, frankly, the lowest cost. There are options that you can exercise with license plate readers that don't require a gate here. You can actually pick up the vehicle's plate as they come in and out of the facility, and you can set up a system that will track that by plate number and be able to identify that. If they're a monthly pass holder, it knows what that plate is, and it says, Bob is here, check, we'll put that in. So you don't necessarily need to go to a gated system. I'm not familiar with the exact issues that your garage suffered in the past. I can tell you the technology has gotten remarkably better over the last few years. We're working with the city of Burlington right now to look at doing a retrofit on the airport and all of their garages. And once we get that set up, I would invite you to come over and take a look at what's available on the market now, because some of the stuff out there is it's very reliable, it's got great uptime, it's kind of pretty, and it's got some great features.
So that's from a contractual and a functional standpoint. The next question I had was, you've mentioned it's a national trend. Are we seeing this regionally as well? It's none of our business to open other municipalities' parking contracts. Right. But is number one, shared use and that type of technology going to be something we're going to we are seeing pop up more and more. I mean, there's only so many parking facilities in Vermont, so it's only a few towns we'd be considering anyway. But is this something we can expect to be somewhat familiar if business owners have looked at other municipalities that have parking utilities?
I can't speak for Vermont.
Yeah.
I can tell you within the Northeast, it's ubiquitous.
Okay.
The more you get into denser urban centers, the more you're going to see it's just commonly accepted practice. Municipalities more and more have less and less money to spend on infrastructure to build their way out of something here. And this is a low-cost, big bang way to get access to capacity without having to spend thousands and thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm. And the cost too, on a per space perspective, was higher in filling the donut hole, which is my reference to VSAC's surface lot, essentially, was higher on a per space basis for those 156 spaces because of the cost of going over the building for construction?
Well, you've got to go over the building for construction. I can't remember if you needed to shore the footings or not. It may have been built to support that, but that's often a significant cost as well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the other thing is that is a construction and capital cost. It does not include the coordination costs you're going to have to go through for interrupting what is a live and very active structure for 6 to 12 months while you add on this additional capacity.
Right. Okay.
In consideration of ongoing contracts that the city is under, and thinking through if the thought was to move in the direction of a shared parking system, what would be your recommendation and how that can be done incrementally?
Well, and if you talk to these stakeholders, every one of them will tell you that, you know, one of the reasons they have concerns about doing any type of, relaxing those contracts is those contracts are actually the foundation for contracts they have with their tenants. So I would say your first step is to get a robust data sample on how the space is actually being used that you can present to that stakeholder, but then that stakeholder can take to their constituents and say, there's a lot less danger than you think. Because the easiest thing in the world to do is do nothing. And you need to give folks a compelling reason to do otherwise. And presenting that data that says there's less harm here than you think is a big step in that direction.
Thank you.
Couple things. I really love the idea of, you know, improving signage and making the garage actually usable in its current state. And the management piece makes perfect sense. Data collection, all that makes a lot of sense. My question more is around the actual, like, you know, moving away from a gate, which I don't know why a gate was such a problem, but if we move towards something like a license plate reader, we heard recommendations that the pay stations and mobile app were challenging for people to interact with. Is a plate reader technology as opposed to a gate going to be a barrier for people to understand how this works, just general public going in and out? Or is that more of a behind the scenes kind of?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, people don't generally see the cameras that LPR works with. The biggest issue that you get with LPR is just read reliability. The thing about a gate is if you go with a gated system, there's a significant amount of reliability as far as capturing that activity, because the bottom line is somebody's got to pull a ticket or put a paid ticket into a reader, or they have to present a pass in order to get that gate to go up and down. You know you're going to capture that data. With an LPR system, their reliability has gotten really good since they came online, but there is not an LPR system out there that's going to get 100% data capture. The best we've seen is about 93, 94%. So there's always going to be a certain number of plates that go through that get captured in the system as unreadable. That is going to require quite a bit of management within the system here, because you've got to go in every day and sort of clear those out. Otherwise, the system will start reading this as, if it read your plate coming in, but it didn't read your plate going out, the system's going to show your car still in there at 3 o'clock in the morning. Or if it didn't get a good read going in, but it got a great read going out, the system's going to go haywire because it can't figure out how your car magically appeared in the garage and then drove out again. So you need to have somebody there who can clear out these errors and get a good data field for you going forward.
And then my other question has to do with potential for future parking structures. So, right off the bat, I personally kind of like the idea of building up on the existing structure just because it's there. Maybe it's a little bit more expensive. The number, I didn't think it looked incredibly more expensive just from the numbers in the presentation as a per spot basis, but I could be wrong. But my challenge with that is something that was brought up, I think, in your initial presentation to the public here was, the rotary being this mental barrier for people, and that even though there may be capacity in the garage on the east side of the circle, that people interacting with Restaurant Row and other things have this challenge. Do you feel like if at some point we were to move to construct more parking, that we should do it on the west side? Is that more advantageous? Is that more usable than doing it on the
I would say based on that cluster analysis that we had, which showed 54 space shortage on this side, your best bet is to find a location here, and of the locations that we were able to identify, we're sitting on the one that would be most advantageous, unless you were to engage with a private developer who's already building parking in the area and would be willing to go into a public-private partnership to create some capacity in the same geographic area.
Other questions, concerns from council?
I have something more contractual, so I'll leave that.
Yeah, and that's just a reminder. I mean, what's being discussed here is a contract that has contracts that have two parties. So it's not a unilateral decision that we get to make. It's something that we do have to discuss, negotiate, and review with those partners, with those people who hold the other halves of those contracts. So just from a public perspective, just so folks understand, it's not something where we snap our fingers to the solution and go about our merry way. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So I guess it would be good to talk about, we're receiving the parking study today, what our next steps will be. Yeah, and we will absolutely open that up. But just so we preempt that discussion, a little bit about what we're going to do now in terms of taking the information data. We've had the public stakeholder meeting.
So our intention, and Andy, feel free to jump in, we did, following the stakeholder meeting, we did want to give the stakeholders and the council time to submit more questions, submit more data, refine, if there's something that we hear from a stakeholder that changes the numbers or the analysis, we want time to integrate that in. So we were allowing for the opportunity of that to happen. I think once we feel comfortable, and Andy said, as the expert kind of says, okay, this is the final finished product, then I think continued, a couple of things, continued conversations with the stakeholders. Later on tonight, you'll receive the proposed FY18 parking budget that builds out some of these things. So depending on how the budgetary conversation goes, take more active steps towards resourcing, signage, access control, et cetera, from there, and start chipping away at these recommendations.
Great. Okay, now we'll open it up for public comments, questions.
I just have one question. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
If once a gate or a plate reader is implemented, how much data, how long do you feel we would need to get a good grasp on really what is happening in the garage as far as numbers in there?
Oh, some of that would depend on the time of year.
Right.
But I would say minimum 6 months.
And ideally over the winter. I'm
Yeah,
assuming.
well, ideally, you'd have a 12-month cycle. You'd have a full year to look at it. But minimum, you'd need 6 months so that you can account for some variability according to seasonal changes, changes in the academic year, that type of thing.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Well, good question.
That just raised one for me, sorry. The LPR technology that we're referring to,
Yeah.
is it an expansive program that not only just records license plates, but builds you schematics and so on and so forth through time of day, number of spots, so on and so forth? I mean, is it a programmable thing, or is it just going to give you raw data that needs to be resourced out from there?
Most of the vendors who are selling this now have fairly robust analytics back end that goes with this here, that has the ability to provide you with that information. So especially when you're seeing this for access control, a lot of them already have that built in. If they don't, it's something that you can usually spec out before a purchase. And most of these companies started their life as software companies, so it's not a lot of heavy lifting to get them to customize the analytics.
Okay, thank you.
Great, now we'll open it up. Public questions, inquiries, comments even, concerns, praises. I'm gonna find an emotion that matches something somebody has to say.
Somebody throw an emoji in there.
Yes, Maura.
My name is Maura, I'm the director of Winooski Community Partnership, and we met, and I just wanted to say that I was thrilled to meet you and felt like, wow, this subject is a little bit dry. It was a great job, and I felt like I was really heard as a stakeholder, so I'm very appreciative.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And-
And also, I think you agreed to get me a t-shirt, so.
Yes, I wanted to confirm you are the one who's willing to act as parking coordinator for the community.
Sounds like a WCP investment.
We'll talk offline. Other comments, questions, concerns from the public? And I would just add in that, as Jesse mentioned, it's sort of an open period here to have feedback. So don't hesitate if you do leave and say, gosh, wish I had shared something, to shoot something in your email. Yes.
I'm Catherine Dingle, and I'm wearing a couple of hats tonight because I'm also, I represent the city of Winooski, but I also live in one of the buildings that has gated off parking. And there are 4 buildings down there whose parking lots are basically empty all day long. And I'm wondering, Andy, if you have experience in how do you approach a building like mine that is a condominium where 2 spaces go with my unit. I'm perfectly happy to let people park in it during the day, but there's a security issue in our building. So part of our security is that outdoor gate. Have you had experience where you negotiate with private holders like that to reconfigure the space in a way that satisfies the people who live there, but allows for shared use of the parking, which to me makes so much sense? I mean, why waste all these parking spaces?
Yeah, it can be done. First of all, you need to reach consensus among all of the unit owners. And I will tell you that when there is a small stipend involved in getting access to that space, that usually helps move talks along. In addition, if the other party who wants to share in this space is willing to spend a little money on capital to address their concerns about safety, putting in card readers so that there is controlled access to the exterior of the garage, or putting them in so that they can only come in and out of the garage and not other places, goes a long way to addressing that as well. So it's a conversation. There's usually a little bit of capital investment. There may be an additional incentive that helps swing the needle. And that's usually the one that folks choke on initially is submitting that incentive until you start again weighing the cost. If I'm a potential developer and I need 20 spaces to make my project work, it may be a lot cheaper to pay an annual stipend of a few $1,000s to get access to those under your building than it is going to be to build them at $5,000 to $15,000 a space elsewhere.
And does the city parking coordinator help with that negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, they can, depending on how you structure the position, really work as a broker. There is another community across the river who I'm not going to name, who is already working actively to create this position within their community. And this person is going to go out and, like I said, broker these deals, talk to the owners, find out what kind of conditions they would be willing to entertain a shared use agreement, put them together with interesting parties that would be good partners, and then also help them structure the legal agreement that protects all parties and documents who's going to do what. I don't know if I mentioned that before. It's in the report. That's probably one of the most critical parts of this.
Well, and just to piggyback on that, this is not a new discussion for us or a new idea, that one. We've actually tried that, including, we've gone as far as to approach residential units to have that conversation. I will be blunt in that we have not had a designated staff person kind of able to have the bandwidth to really own and focus on only that issue. And the same would be true for entities like CATMA. We've done a lot of hand-holding with CATMA and Go Vermont and introductions to businesses to say, you know, you're telling us you've got a parking problem. These people are all about reducing the need for there to be parking. You know, we hope you'll work together. But I think from my perspective, you know, we've lacked the capacity to really just doggedly stay on that I think you're talking about trying to create with that position. So it's a good question.
The other thing to remember too is it's an evolutionary process. You may go take a run at this 2 or 3 times before conditions are really favorable for folks to start to consider this. I live in Boston and watch the Big Dig very closely because I was curious to see what kind of impact that was going to have on downtown Boston. And right after it opened, there was an incredible spike in, there was a drop in ridership for transit, and there was a significant spike in the number of folks who were driving in every day. And it lasted for about 6 months. And then conditions normalized and ridership came back up. If I was pitching a ride-sharing service 6 months when it opened, I probably would have had a hard time making a sell. If I waited 6 months, I could probably make a killing at that point. So part of it is having somebody on board who has the ability to move when the time is right in order to make those kind of agreements or deals.
Other questions from the public? Concerns, comments? Okay, again, encourage you to look up Jesse's email, throw her under the bus, or we've got this on the website, so feel free to reach out, contact us with any thoughts, concerns, ideas you have, and again, encourage you to look through the whole report. Great job, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time. Can't thank you enough for the work and the on-the-ground work that you did to get us here, so we appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah. This isn't the last. At least most of us will probably say, I guess.
No, sir. No, I've often talked about getting my Vermont driver's
license. Well, you Metro Pass. No, and thanks. Peter, Ray, Heather, Jesse, Angela, I know too, I'm sure supporting a lot of ways. Thank you guys very much for all your work to support that project, and for Councilor Sweeney for hanging in on me as the liaison on it. So thank you all. Great, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to say that we have successfully received the parking study. All right, we'll move on to item F, designation of the 15-minute parking spaces along Winooski Falls Way.
So this, no parking budget.
Not at all.
Come on, lots of stuff.
Just scratching this.
So just as a reminder, this was on your agenda last meeting as a discussion item. So this is the elimination of or kind of the redesignation of 4 existing 15-minute spots realigned along Winooski Falls Way to meet the business needs, and establish new courtesy spots as opposed to 15-minute spots. This has been shared with the abutting businesses, and Heather has had a number of conversations with them. That was the main question last time. Peter, I don't know if there's anything else you would like to add.
And what was that feedback?
The feedback that I reached out to everyone who's immediately there.
Yeah.
The feedback that I did receive was very positive overall. I did not hear back from everyone, but I did hear back from quite a few.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a couple of things outlined in this memo attached to your agenda. Really, if you choose, your action is to establish the free parking, courtesy parking spots along Winooski Falls Way as indicated in the image, and return the 15-minute spots on Cascade Way to metered parking spots. That's your authority. You need to establish that free parking provision.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about last time, we're responding to feedback and trying to be adaptive and trying to support businesses that need the in and out, and especially Winooski's fought for a very long time to have a market in town, and I think it makes a lot of sense to take a look at it in light of the different traffic patterns that that's creating and needs for people, so, and support that any way we can. Questions, concerns?
I think in the discussion I just brought up hearing from the businesses, so thank you for doing that outreach to them.
Mm-hmm. Any questions or concerns from the public? Great. So seeing and hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the designation from 15-minute parking spaces along Winooski Falls Way to become courtesy spaces as presented in this proposal.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all very much for your work. Okay, item G. Just another quick one. Receive the Chittenden Solid Waste District FY18 budget.
Tell me you're not reading that whole thing.
I've already read it, so no questions.
Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Reeves. I'm the new general manager for the Chittenden Solid Waste District.
Congratulations. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, Tom Moreau retired last summer after about 21 years of service to the district, and I came on board in August. So I'm here to present to you the fiscal 18 budget for Chittenden Solid Waste. And I'm happy to be able to tell you that the financial outlook for the district does remain strong. I am also happy to be able to tell you that there is, yet again, I think after maybe 19 straight years, no member assessments, so there'll be no district assessments per capita this year. In addition, there will not be an increase to the solid waste management fee. So we are looking to keep most things pretty much status quo. We are looking to increase our budget this year fairly significantly for the district against last year, up 9%, but both the revenues and expenditures are looking to increase. Some of the main reasons for the increases are, as I think many people are feeling, uncertainty over healthcare, health insurance costs. So we are hedging some of the bets. We're also looking towards some retirements. We have a lot of long-term employees who are looking to retire the next year or two, so some additional staffing expenses are on tap as we kind of assess our staffing needs going forward for the next 20 years. So that's some of the things that are kind of adding to the increase. In addition to, one of the things I asked my team to do this year was to give me a realistic budget. So that meant the budget went up. So we're looking at expecting our operating revenues to be $11,282,932. Operating expenditures looking to be $10,525,152. So that does leave us with a nice net revenue over expenditures of just over $750,000. We will be looking to transfer about $370,000 out of our solid waste management fee rate stabilization fund. As you may recall, the last time the district raised that fee was about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was raised fairly significantly at the time, a pretty hefty jump, with the thought being that excess not needed in the first year or two would be put into a standalone fund, and that is what happened. And the rationale for that was so that instead of raising the fee each year a little bit, it was raised one lump sum, and then we would draw down as needed. The intent was to have that stabilization fund last for 4 years. We're looking to have it probably last for 5, hopefully for 6. So we can guarantee this will be the 4th year of no rate increase. And then I'm fairly positive, I'm not guaranteeing for camera, but fairly positive that we will not be recommending an increase in fiscal 19. 20 will be taking a look, so for this year for sure. We're also not increasing our tipping fee, our disposal fee at the material recovery facility. So that would mean that those costs for our haulers will remain the same as well. We are looking to increase one of the fees at our drop-off centers, the fee for handling organics, so basically food scraps. As you maybe have heard, there's some movement on the food scraps and the organics as Act 148 continues to roll out. When we raised the fee at the drop-off center about a year or two ago, we embedded the cost of the food scraps into the cost for trash and recycling services for our customers who use all 3 services. We do not charge currently, but will be charging in July, a fee for our customers who only use the drop-off centers for food scraps. If you're bringing all 3 streams, the costs are included. If you're only bringing us food scraps, the cost will now be $1.50 per bucket, just to kind of cover the cost of managing the organics and the food scraps. We also have implemented a fee on some of our business customers who use our environmental depot for their household hazardous waste. That is simply to try again to recover the labor costs. Sometimes folks who use that, mainly businesses, maybe they'll bring us 3 55-gallon drums. Those are easy to deal with generally. Or they may bring us 200 individual vials of something. Each one of those 200 vials have to be tested and sampled. So it could be anywhere from a half an hour for the drums to 4 hours for the vials. So it's an attempt to work with our businesses who use the service to take a look at what they're producing and to see if there are other ways to manage that waste ahead of time before it gets to the depot, or to, again, help recover the true cost of managing the waste. And the one last item that actually is going down is for our biosolids customers. Anyone who uses our brokering services for biosolids will see that management fee actually decrease as we're going to be devoting less staff hours to that program. So those are the main highlights of our budget, but I am happy to answer any other questions or additional questions that you may have. We are asking our member towns to, if possible, to approve the budget at the initial meeting, but we do understand that some towns do like to take a second bite at the apple and bring it back to another meeting. But we do have 45 days for our member towns to approve the budget from when our board approves it, which was on April 26th.
Help me with math.
June 10th.
Okay, we will be good for that. Last year we missed it, so
Okay.
we want to make sure we're on this year. We received it last year and then just wrote back, because I'll blame Tom since he's not here. He came in. No. So, and we have a new counselor too, so this can be pretty overwhelming. But so just from a voting structure standpoint, we're obviously one of many towns that vote to accept it. For the budget to actually be turned down, it requires, there's a certain percentage, and I can't recall what that is. But
Yeah, and then there's a whole other process as well that
there's a
that we go
population
through.
percentage assigned, and the representation's kind of,
Exactly.
I hate to say it, but complex. Our representative, Ted Regula, Ted's been the alternate for a number of years, and hopefully is doing a great job. Ted goes to Florida for big parts of the spring, so I'm guessing he's probably not back either. But if you've got specific questions about Winooski issues too, we can also ask Ted for any fill-ins, and we usually have him in at least once a year just to say hello and see how things are going.
And his spot is up this year. This is the year for the M through Z communities. So I hope that he has contacted you about renewing. I believe he is interested.
Yeah.
I have heard from another Winooski resident who may be interested as well, so I've asked that person to reach out to you.
I don't think we have an alternate right now, so that
Exactly.
actually.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's kind of, so there's been contact on that, because I know I've gotten a letter about that, but there's been contact made by staff, and they've got all the gears in motion there.
Perfect, thank you.
And the great thing about Winooski is it's a hauler's town. So if tipping fees, especially like 3 years ago when tipping fees showed up, we have several of the large haulers that either live in town or have their centers here. So that's always usually something that's near and dear to the community's heart, because they're businesses that employ a lot of residents here. So great to see that relationship continuing to flourish in a positive way. About the only time I think I've heard complaints is if you guys buy new trucks. Other questions or concerns? You know, I'll say the first time I received this budget, it was kind of like, oh, I've got about a gazillion questions. The general philosophy of the city has been to review, get an understanding of where the investments are being made, and really try to do governance through the governing body, which we have a representative on. And prior to Ted, it was Jim Ticehurst. We have a history of strong representation there. So I don't mean to say it's a formality by any means to accept the budget, but it's something where we have another outlet too for advocacy if there's specific issues you have concerns about.
Makes a lot of sense.
Any questions or concerns? And we'll bring this back for approval during the first June meeting. Questions or concerns? Any questions or concerns from the public? You know, I guess I'm so sorry to go back, but one thing that we seem to be in good shape on that the rest of Vermont is not is recycling. And our capabilities to handle continued recycling work. I'm guessing that given that wasn't discussed in here, that was the one thing that I appealed through this looking for. We're in good shape in terms of continuing recycling programs, which I know is a growing concern in Vermont and across the country for solid waste districts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Chittenden County in particular is in very good shape because the district does own the material recovery facility in this part of the state. The recycling commodities markets are rebounding, so we're having a very strong year this year. You may notice if you dive a little bit deeper into the budget that we're projecting a significantly higher revenue from the sales of the recyclable commodities this year as opposed to the fiscal 17 budget. That's because that number was developed in fiscal 16 and the markets were not so great. So this year we've seen a nice turnaround. We're expecting things to hold steady for the first maybe half of the fiscal year. China is looking again at their specifications for fiber. So as China goes, so goes the rest of the world, particularly with paper products. So we are watching that very closely. We are also looking at investments that we'll need to make in our material recovery facility. It's 20 plus years old, and it does not have the technology that I would like to see it have. So that we can capture more materials out of the stream than we are right now. And we're doing a very good job. We could be doing better. There are a lot of smaller items, very tiny items, that have value if you can capture them. And right now we simply can't. We hand sort our recyclables. And we really need to make the leap into the 21st century. So that's something that I'm going to have my team look at very, very closely over the next year and a half to 2 years. What is the investment that we need to be making in infrastructure for the county, for the district, so that we can continue to meet our waste reduction goals? Because as the goals the numbers get smaller that we have to reach as far as the weight per capita, we have to start looking not only at are we capturing all of the low-hanging fruit, but then what are the strategies to get the harder to handle, harder to manage materials? So first step for me is taking a look at the infrastructure. That was my charge by the board, and that's one of the things that is near and dear to my heart. That's part of my background. I was a MRF operator for almost 10 years, so I'm very familiar with the newer technologies, and they keep developing, which is great. I'm also very active with the national group about packaging, so trying to keep an eye on what are the new packaging designs and materials that are coming down the road. changes all the time. As you can see, you can walk down your condiments aisle in the market, you see different packages all the time. But making sure that we're able to capture everything possible out of that stream. We only have the one landfill now, as you well know, and extending the life of that landfill is very important. So I think we're going to be setting ourselves up, hopefully the next few years, to really make a leap forward in our infrastructure. It's time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Enjoy the work.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll move on to item H, which is approval of the water budget. And we discussed this in depth last go around. Is there anything new from staff on the approval of the water budget, the water capital budget, the wastewater stormwater budget, and the wastewater storm capital budgets?
Yes, there's one small change.
Okay.
The capital budgets have been amended. We've received actual quotes for the hot box, so that amount was increased slightly.
So the original budget figure was an estimate?
It was the original thought of what a hot box would cost. The actual numbers came in, I think, $5,000 higher, and that's split 3 ways. So not very much money was added, less than $2,000 to the capital plan.
Okay. Notable, thank you for pointing that out. Are there questions, concerns beyond that? Great to have more secure numbers on it. Again, I think we spent a pretty significant amount of time on these budgets. Some good questions and answer last go around. Going once, going twice. Any questions, concerns from the public regarding, I'll just say, the water budgets? Okay. So let's see if we can get this. We're gonna take items H, I, J, and K as approvals in one. So I'll ask one more time, is there any other comments or questions about those items? Because we'll take them in rapid succession. Okay, so seeing and hearing none, I entertain a motion for approval of the water budget.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries. I would entertain a motion for approval of the water capital budget.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Sweeney, second by Brian Corrigan. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries. I would entertain a motion for approval of the wastewater and stormwater budget.
Second.
Motion by Eric, second by Brian Sweeney. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries. And then item K, I would entertain a motion for approval of the wastewater stormwater capital budget.
So moved.
Motion by Brian Corrigan, second by Eric. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? Motion carries. And again, if folks have specific questions about those, I encourage you to watch the last meeting's minutes, and also we've got presentations in there from that meeting as well, and the updated budgets are in the package. Okay, item L, discussion, budget, parking.
All right, since we haven't had enough parking discussions tonight. So as Heather, and thank you Heather for being willing to click for me, sets this up, 2 things I want to highlight. This is 2 big discussions running into each other with receiving the parking study, having it still be in working draft form, and hearing the parking budget on the same night. So obviously we would have liked to have some space between those 2 conversations, but what you'll see tonight is our attempt to, within pretty much the last week, respond to the recommendations of the parking study in a planful way for FY18. The other thing, as I've noted in past budget presentations, that that is also in effect in this budget is the reality that this budget is very much linked to the general fund budget in terms of supporting staff. And so some staffing decisions were made under the general fund budget approval process that are then reflected here, but our interest going into FY19 will be to realign some of that staffing support, specifically the parking budget right now very heavily supports the public works team that does work in the garage and for parking, but may be overrepresented as compared to enforcement and management. So,
We're getting there.
we're getting there. We're so close.
So close.
There you go. So I'm speaking tonight on behalf of parking, but parking right now is very much a team effort in the city, split between code enforcement, public works, community and economic development, and finance. So I have a team of incredibly smart people behind me.
It'll go as soon as it decides to go. It's not doing anything right now.
All right, I'm going to just talk through this. You have this in front of you in your packet. If it catches up, it catches up. So the first slide, as you'll see in your packet, is our crosswalk to the strategic vision of the city. So parking, very broadly, managed parking promotes vibrancy. It enables density and environmental efficiency and friendliness, and it, of course, ensures the public safety. So in terms of FY17 accomplishments, there was an operations and maintenance manual completed for the parking garage. Traditionally, those are provided after construction. In this case, we received it this year, and that really guides our preventative maintenance work in the garage, our engineering work in the garage, etc.
It's delightful reading for anybody that intensely wants to read something.
Did that come from the creators of the garage?
That came from Hoyle Tanner. And
Okay. Engineers.
It should have
Engineers.
come from the creators of the garage.
Yeah.
We completed $100,000 worth of structural repairs work in the garage, and of course, we are in the process of completing the parking study. So significant changes FY17 to 18. Again, this is our attempt to very quickly respond to the recommendations of the parking study. So two different sets of recommendations. This one is specific. This slide specifically outlines the recommendations on staffing. In the budget recommendation before you, we are proposing to add resources for management. Currently, that's reflected in the budget as a staff position, although it is possible that we could realign those dollars over the next several weeks or months into a contracted position as opposed to a staff position. So that's that management. Those management resources are dedicated 60% from on-street meters and 40% from the garage, and is currently budgeted at a $60,000 salary with benefits, so probably all in about $78,000, $78,000 either for a staff or a contract. Similarly, we are, and you'll hear us talk about this new position more later on as well, we are recommending the addition of a citywide communications staff person. That staff person in this budget is reflected at 28% of salary, and paid for from on-street meters, and then 60% from the WCDC budget that you'll see later on tonight, and 12% out of the general fund that's already been approved. So other significant changes. So we have in this budget reflects $10,000 in budgeted expenses for signage improvements in addition to another $10,000 that we will come to you to reallocate from reserves. We've also set aside $10,000 for infrastructure technology solutions to do that access control, data collection processes that we need to actually inform the actual usage in the garage, and what you heard from Andy earlier. Additionally, we are trying to proactively plan to meet the growth to demand. So that's coming in two forms. One, over the next, in this existing budget and next year's budget, we do plan to install 6 new modern pay stations. That includes a full build out to accommodate the Strand coming online, so putting pay stations on this corner of the garage as opposed to the Winooski Falls Way access to the garage. And it was very important to our team as we built this budget to retain some projected surplus with the idea that there might be more needs over the course of the year that we would want to come back to you for allocations. So this budget does include retaining $38,000 in surplus in the on-street meters budget. So here you see one slide for the on-street meters budget. So $300,000 in revenues, expenses and capital get us to that bottom line number of $38,000 surplus. And I'm happy to walk through any lines you would like here. But just in the interest of going through and then answering questions, so the next slide presents the parking garage budget. Again, about $650,000 in revenue, $550 in expenses, capital, and this budget does zero out. So if you look at the total fund balances between the two different revenue streams, we are sitting on about $500,000 worth of reserves if these budgets go according to plan over FY18. And then very boring slide, we need to fully implement the parking study. And team, did I misstate anything or anything else you all want to add?
Why such a significant decrease in anticipated revenues for the parking garage?
For the,
If you go back a page.
can you go back one?
If you show an actual for 16 at 793,000, but you're only projecting 654.
We will no longer be collecting public contracts, and Spinner Place is no longer paying us.
That hurts.
The 10,000 for access control, is that a study of what we're gonna need for access control, or is that the actual equipment? I thought in the parking study, it called out something more like 50 grand for actual
We're
technology.
starting to set aside funding for it. We
Okay.
already have about $30,000 in existing reserves.
Thank you.
And then I think with the blend of short and long term, the point too for public at home, last year we intentionally left 100,000 plus of intended fund balance in this, in the parking budget, the parking fund. With the what's being proposed for $38,000 contribution this year, we're looking at having $309,000 in fund balance left. So we've also allocated $100,000, not quite $100,000, $80-ish thousand from our last year's general fund balance towards infrastructure projects and potential expenses.
Not at this point yet. It was discussed, but it has not formally been approved in the allocation spreadsheet that I was given from your meeting.
So I think the discussion, if I can, and please correct me, when back in February, when you had that discussion about the ad drop list, there were decision points left made, and then there were about $200,000 that was intentionally not allocated at that time, with the idea that we would come back to you before the end of the fiscal year and allocate the balance of that. And that is, our hope is to do that at your June 6th meeting and your June 19th meeting.
Okay.
That's also pending contract.
Yeah, I think the funding set aside was because we recognized parking City Hall, that there could be expenses, be them legal, be them paying research people, be them paying for environmental tests or pre-development fees, that we might have some of those expenses hit us. And that's what those funds set aside.
I don't have any formal allocation from council.
Right, it's just left behind. I mean, but that was the intent of leaving it behind, was to have something we can go
For
back
capital.
and look at the minutes. Exactly.
Yes.
I'm just putting all the resources on the table that we're leaving behind because we're adding operational cost to these budgets.
And I think what you're hearing us say, our intention is to come back to you in June with an actual allocation of those funds. If we just leave them behind in FY16, they're going to go into the
FY17 surplus.
Right, and
To be reallocated next year.
Right. So our intention is to come back to you at the next meeting, actually with a plan for those dollars.
Okay, and what is the plan for those reserves from an operational standpoint, or I guess, because that definitely ties into this conversation. Because if we set aside funds with the intent of potentially supporting those infrastructure, then the or improvements, right now we're taking some short-term costs out of these funds to address one-time expenses. Do you understand the question?
No.
If we set aside funds for some of the infrastructure projects generally, and we said we want to put that money aside for that purpose, which in discussions, that's exactly what it was. It was not a mystery what that money being left behind was for. And now what I'm hearing is the proposal is just to bring back additional one-time expenditures off of those funds. Is that correct?
So I think our intent was to come back to you to allocate those funds likely for either, and we have not fully had these conversations yet, but likely for either the consultant work to find solutions around access control, or the actual purchase of that technology. So in both cases, those are one-time expenditures.
Okay. So do you understand the question? Because if we're spending one-time infrastructure spending out of these funds, we want to be really clear that that's what the pool of funds was designated for and what it was for, and we want to make sure we don't.
So I think maybe, can you go back to the slide about, one more back? These are the one-time things here. So I think our staff position is that these aren't necessarily one-time costs. That as we modernize our system and as we are, signage perhaps aside that will be additionally allocated from reserves, as we modernize our system and stay up to date with it, we are going to continually need to update or improve signage. We're going to continually need to invest in infrastructure that manages an access control system. Those are going to, they might sit in different buckets. It may not be capital purchase, it may be a software maintenance cost or something like that. Mm-hmm. But these are, in a modern parking management system, these are going to be ongoing costs over the life of the parking system.
Okay. So access control, like you said, could be $50,000 total expenditure, could be amortized over a couple of years, but generally, you could put that as a technology line you're building into the budget from year to year. Okay. Now that I've probably been thoroughly confusing.
Satisfied with that?
Yeah, I mean, they're not separated conversations, because it doesn't make sense for us to split off a batch of funds for a specific purpose, have them come back being proposed for exactly what we said not to propose them for, which was ones and twos cost, and then do any kind of infrastructure work with another budget. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
So it's important that those two conversations do stay
separate.
Well, but also, recognizing, we don't want to rob Peter and pay Paul, as they say.
If I could clarify one thing on that, I think the allocation of the FY16 surplus, which is not a conversation we are, we're not relying on that conversation to believe in this budget. The work, I think the preliminary conversations we've had as a team, the work we need to do with those funds for FY18 in a planning stage is much more around kind of the big picture, how those decisions domino, and what are the decisions around parking and City Hall and Lot D and the community center, how those decisions are structured, what decision affects what decision, what the financing of different models might be. So while parking does tangentially touch those questions, there are a lot of other questions that go along with those resources. So in our mind, we now have a collective mind, in our collective minds, this is the budget that supports the parking infrastructure and parking study implementation. And that those funds will be dedicated to putting together that cascade of decision points and options for you all about a series of capital projects, one of which might be parking.
Great.
Does that clarify?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Yes. Let's talk about staff. There's new positions in there.
Yeah.
Thoughts, concerns?
Well, I think there's definitely a need for a dedicated person to work on this. And on the recommendations, on the movement to shared use to the extent that's possible, just understanding all the moving pieces. Whether or not that is a need that's best filled by adding a staff person or contracted service, I think, you just got this a week ago. So I think there's some work to be done in order to determine sort of what the market is in terms of expertise. So I support having an allocation of resources for somebody to do that work. I think we should give Jesse some time to figure out what that would look like in terms of the specific individual involved. But I'm convinced that it's a need.
And this budget can sustain a staff member. It's not just, adding another staff member in the general fund, right? It's coming from parking money. It's parking money paying a parking person to manage parking. That makes a lot of sense to me, especially with the complexities, all this other stuff going on, which, the decisions are, the conversations around adding staff members are always pretty robust conversations, because it's not often as cut and dry in my mind as this is. It's, I think it's pretty recognized that there's a need, and, the nice thing is that there's
Revenue.
positive dollars at the end of the sheet to support that need. It makes sense to me too.
Within this, there is the decision within this fund for a position that stretches across some of the other funds as well, which is that communications position also. Which I think is, from my perspective, something that is very necessary for the city and the point of growth that we're at with the city.
Yeah, I think part of the benefit of attaching it to special funds is also if the revenue's not there in the future, it's not there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's not to sound negative, but it's
I
different.
imagine there'd be more of a conversation than,
Well,
than just that, but you're right though.
that's
it's pretty simple. When you look at it like that, but of course there would, depending on need, be more conversation.
A little more sensitive.
Well, it is different though than attaching to the general fund for a very specific purpose related to a very specific thing. It's nice to have the flexibility of doing it in a special fund.
Yeah.
WCP, is it in here?
There's $5,000, yes.
Great. Okay. So
5,000?
It's in addition to the amount from the general fund, which is $7,500. And then they also receive the sidewalk usage permits as well.
So it's something we talked about exploring was doing a total shift out at some juncture, potentially away from the general fund, to have the full 12.5. That was something when we approved that decision that we did discuss. And part of that was because every year we were having the same conversation around WCP and the general fund.
So just from my historic perspective, that was a discussion to move 12.5 out of the general fund to a special revenue fund for WCP.
A total, yeah.
Increasing that 5,000 to 12.5.
So it's 7,500 coming out of the general fund.
So right now you're doing 75 out of general, 5 out of parking. Is that correct? Okay.
And what's the anticipated time allotment before you move it all out?
So my understanding is the 75 is already approved in the general fund.
To my knowledge, it is.
Yeah. So to change that with this budget, would actually increase the revenue stream to WCP, which I'm sure more would love. So I think that that discussion
perky over there.
should be for FY19 as we put together the total fiscal picture.
Yeah. So for next year's budget, hey, there's a $7,500 head start.
Other questions, concerns? You know, just going back, and I'm sorry to do this, but just so it's documented somewhere, I don't think that there's a department other than community services that has not managed the parking garage at some juncture and managed parking
You're
in the
up,
city.
Ray.
Well, yeah, that's.
Don't get any
right.
ideas.
But I'm being serious. I mean, I know when it first came about, the police department managed it. I mean, there was a long time where they were doing all the interaction stuff because it was like enforcement. And Steve Palmer did it with.
I was originally hired as the parking garage administrative assistant in
There you
2005.
go. Even the
It
accountants
was
run the
always Public Works.
Yeah.
We did have phone calls that went through the police department for daytime phone calls, evening phone calls to dispatch. Daytime came to city clerk's office.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about the gate calls too.
They came to
you
the
know,
city clerk's office during the day and went
Yeah.
to dispatch in the evening.
Right. So, okay, it feels like every department has had at least
It's a
some
team
hand in the
approach.
management
Oh, yeah.
of it. So, I think that that's a great step. Talking about creating somebody who specializes it and not expecting it to be just some random hat that somebody can put on in the middle of the day and do effectively. That might explain some of where we're at.
Other questions, comments, concerns? Doesn't sound like we're getting a lot of resistance on staff and stuff. Okay, cool. Any questions, concerns?
Do you have
from public?
resistance?
No. It's just
Are you
it's the
looking for some
are you
resistance?
angling for some
it's the
resistance,
quickest like
To
staffing
play devil's
conversation we've ever had. No, I'm not playing devil's
As
advocate.
complex as parking is,
was gonna say,
that's
I
all
can't-
on
I
one
can't
sheet that
think-
makes it
I'm
very
fully
easy.
supportive. I think the whole point of parking too that we still haven't done the best job of doing is people ask where does the money go, and it's reinvesting in it in a really positive way, which makes a lot of sense. And same thing with the communications. That's things that people can touch and see the results of. So I mean, I think it's exactly what you bring revenue in like that to do.
And from a customer perspective, that is going to be such a value add for all these people to interact with parking. And I mean, it must be frustrating to go to each different person that has whatever their little stake is, and then going back and forth. So I'm sure that a single point of contact is going to be a welcome addition for, especially for those key stakeholders.
I did realize I did have one question I forgot to ask. What it doesn't. So part of the parking study recommendations was looking at a regionalized pay, like phone pay system. Is there any room in this budget for if that were the way things were to develop? Where?
Yeah, so there is a RFP on the street now between Burlington and Winooski to have the same pay app. And there's money in the budget for the app we currently have, so it would be a shift of resources.
Amazing. Great.
We're trying.
Any other questions, concerns from council?
Did you think when you got here parking was going to be your biggest issue?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Parking is
some secret thing, that's for sure.
As Andy says,
Yeah.
parking problem is a sign of success.
Absolutely.
We want this problem. This is a good problem to have. We just need to manage it effectively.
Right.
I'll also say that we hid plenty of skeletons from her. No.
But
Not all the stuff.
But parking was
Parking's
not
not
one
one
of
of them.
All right, any questions, comments from the public? Great, so seeing and hearing none, we will close the parking budget discussion. Thank you all very much for all your work.
Heather, I'll switch with you.
That way you can talk in support of me when I say something horrifying, so.
You sound really confident.
No,
She's way smarter
I
than
actually
I
do feel pretty okay. Should I have visited more?
No, be very
Okay, so I'm here to present the Winooski Community Development budget, and I want to kind of just set the stage for people who are watching at home, just so they have an understanding of what the special revenue fund is. I'm going to put it in very vague and general terms, and if we need to drill down into it, I'm going to poke Angela. But the funds that are being discussed as the community development budget are the proceeds of a trust created naming the Winooski City Council as trustees when the Winooski Community Development Corporation was dissolved in 2008. At that time, the WCDC, Winooski Community Development Corporation, held a promissory note in the amount of $1,098,000. Rather than forfeiting the revenue from this note upon dissolution of the organization, the WCDC entrusted the City Council with the future proceeds under the condition that the funds would be utilized for the following activities. And these are the dispositive provisions that we've talked about so many times. They are A, creating jobs and fostering industry and commerce. B, business, office, factory, commercial, and industrial development. C, improving the quality of existing housing stock and promoting future housing opportunities. D, fostering and preserving educational, artistic, recreational, cultural, and historical resources for residents of the city of Winooski. In 2018, payment on the CDC bond will commence. While we had anticipated a budget of $400,000 during previous discussions of the CDC funds, the budget presented tonight will be based on revenues of $300,000. This reflects a $100,000 decrease in the payment from the TIF for fiscal year 18 in order to maintain TIF balances. So vision statement alignment, and I'm just going to go through the same basic template that you guys have been seeing all along for these. Economic development touches everything, basically. So it was hard for me to stop writing the ways that it aligns with the vision statement. But economic vitality, obviously, we're talking about a department of one, so I'm going to be talking about myself a lot, but I mean the department when I say me. The Community and Economic Development Officer position is dedicated to supporting economic vitality in the city, and that's through permitting assistance, pursuit of available incentives for businesses and developers. And it's more intangibles than that as well, but I think that those are the easiest to point to. We're currently working on an economic development strategic plan. The Winooski Small Business Loan Program promotes economic vitality. And I also sit on the Plan Review Committee for the Gateway Neighborhood Development Areas. And so that's assisting developers through the process for the form-based code. In terms of transportation and infrastructure, thus far it's been grant writing in support of infrastructure associated with development projects, and that CDBG funds, sales tax reallocation, downtown transportation fund, and municipal planning grant, and I've done each of those thus far. I'm sure there are many more that will come across my desk. In terms of housing, the Economic Development Strategic Plan RFP was written specifically to include a housing element. There is a proposal on the table from the Planning Commission to create a housing commission, and there's been discussion of my department, meaning me, providing the staff facilitator for that. And the Home Improvement Loan Program also supports housing in the city. In terms of a safe, healthy, and connected population, I'm running the events application management process. We've streamlined that process, and so far I think it's been 21 events that have gone through the process. And also I serve as the city liaison to the Winooski Community Partnership. Accomplishments this year thus far, again, we're working on the Economic Development Strategic Plan with Camoin Associates that's underway with the award of a municipal planning grant. I've applied for $355,000 in grant funds thus far. The city events process has been streamlined. It's now available online, and 21 events have been processed in the last 9 months. The Winooski Small Business Loan Program guidelines have been completed and approved. Branding, marketing, and website development. RFQ was released. We had 45 consultants that responded initially. We are now down to the final 4 consultants who came and presented on Friday. So we should be we should be selecting a consultant by the end of this week, and I'll be notifying them, and I'll also be running, I'll be the project manager on that as well. And the TIF and downtown program reporting have been completed for 2016. significant changes. This is a new budget to be discussing at all. So these funds are a new revenue source for the first time this year because we're just starting to pay off the bond. Initially, a payment of $400,000, as I said previously, was discussed with council. Instead, we're proposing $300,000 for fiscal year 18. As you all know, and we discussed on a couple of different occasions, the Community and Economic Development Officer position funding has been removed from the general fund. That was 72% of the position. So 28% is remaining in the on-street parking revenue, and 72% is being proposed from the WCDC funds. We're also proposing funding for 60% of the full-time citywide communications coordinator position. And another thing is professional services will be required to facilitate the master planning process, and we are sorely in need of a new master plan. Our master plan has been readopted a couple of times and is initially from 2003, I believe. So that's an old document. And the proposed budget that you'll see in a moment leaves a significant balance available for future economic development initiatives. And we may, in fact, be coming back with requests based on the results of the Economic Development Strategic Plan, which should be done about December, January. So we may have things that we can move forward on at that point in time. So here's the simplest budget that you'll see this entire budget season. There is no history there. It starts with revenues of $300,000. We're looking at salaries that would be 72% of the Community and Economic Development Officer position, and 60% of the communications proposed coordinator. And then office and general supplies, $10,000, and contracts and professional services would be for someone to facilitate master planning. So total expenses of $156,000. And net revenues, I'm sorry, I didn't say all of it, I'm sorry. $156,155.77, my apologies. I saw you bristle.
Don't drop digits with it.
No, it was dreadful. And that will leave us with an ending fund balance of $143,844.23. Emerging issues for fiscal year 18 are, we're seeing obviously increasing private developer investment in Winooski. I'm currently assisting 10 developments with permitting and incentives. Demand for holding events in Winooski is increasing. There are all sorts of new things coming across my desk, some of them feasible, some of them not necessarily feasible, but I work with everyone who brings an event in to find a way that it can be feasible. Kind of sticking with the whole Winooski get to yes kind of approach to things. So I'm working with a lot of people on that. Master planning work is a priority for guiding future development of the city and will require capacity. I think it's pretty obvious that a communications gap has been identified at this point. The branding and marketing strategy that we're investing in will require staff for deployment and implementation. The Economic Development Strategic Plan will be completed and implementation will commence during fiscal year 18. And the disposition of city parcels, including Lot D, City Hall, and the O'Brien Community Center, will require significant staff resources. And I'm assuming that I will be playing a large role in that, or hoping I'll be playing a large role in that. So just to go through really quickly with you, I have written a job description for a communications coordinator. And here are a few of the things, although I have an actual job description written up, but some of the things that this person can do are take a leading role in deploying the new brand across departments and assist in implementing the marketing strategy. Promote parking options within the city and provide updates to the community as pertain to parking. Develop, produce, and distribute a variety of information and marketing materials. That's one thing that I think is really, really important for marketing the city as an economic development specialist. If I'm going out and I'm trying to recruit businesses, it's really good to have professionally produced packages that I can take out and say, hey, look, come to Winooski. And I brought a couple things that we had in Syracuse. You know, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, and it's not something that I can make with clip art at my desk. You know, having the resources to do that sort of thing would be really, really helpful. Things like housing brochures that explain all the options in the city, parking that explain how parking works. You know, that's the sort of things that we need a communications coordinator for. And while I can produce some of them, I certainly can't carry my current workload and be producing all those materials. So we need someone to facilitate the preparation and dissemination of press releases regarding city events and services, coordinate media requests, and arrange media coverage for special events. I think that it doesn't matter how much we're doing wonderful things here in the city. If we don't have the capacity to be out telling our own story, then to the outside world, they're not happening at all. So it's really important. Coordinating social media communications and citywide notifications and updating website content. Advising and coordinating with departments on strategic communications issues, including positive positioning in news, media, social media, and the community. And I think all being on the same message really makes a huge difference. I think this person can play a role in that. And help to develop a citywide strategic communications plan.
End of slideshow.
What's that?
End of slideshow.
End of slideshow, yes. I'm happy to take any questions about any.
Awesome. So, functional question that's a little tricky. Is there a requirement that we track the amount of repayment towards the $1 million debt?
Yeah.
Did our legal folks prescribe that we note when $1 million has flowed through however
We are actually calculating
Drill
the
it.
interest accruals as well. So this
Right.
first payment's going to be solely towards the interest on the debt. We aren't even going to be touching principal for quite some time.
Okay. I'm sorry to sound like the old person again, but want to do a quick reminder of what if we brought in Billy Niket and Clem and George Cross to explain what the purpose of this window of funding is for. And the vision was to have the city have a debt that it could recover that would create economic development opportunities. The way that this plan came together was in very large one-time investments and sums. And quite frankly, I think everybody involved kind of looked at it that way, that this would be something that got paid into and left alone for a while. And at the end of it, the city would have this $1 million to do something with. It's a different time, and we're facing a really different situation in a different environment. And I guess what I would say is we're stewards of that now, and starting with some steps we took during the budget season, we've gone on a slightly different path than I think was probably initially intended. With that being said, I don't think it's a bad thing or a wrong thing. I think the money that we're spending now has future value too, and that we're investing now has long-term implications to the city's, quite frankly, tax base that outweigh the risk of not piling it up for some mythical one-time $1 million use. With that being said, there's still a healthy fund balance here, and it would be interesting to hear if something comes out of the economic development plan that is not operational and short-term and has like a long-term investment view. I'm assuming that that's one of those things that they'll talk about and look at. Maybe it's, a business, I don't know, similar to the housing trust fund type of, consistent investment tool. I think it would be interesting to press for some kind of, potential long-term allocation. Not just to keep with the spirit of it, but just because it also seems like a smart thing to do, given the way that this was structured and set up. There's always going to be immediate needs and an endless number of reasons to use the money now. So just conservative economic
I do think, though, we are at a certain point where we're hot right now, and if we're not ready to strike while we're hot, we're going to miss that window. So I think that kind of investment in economic development at this moment makes sense. I understand that there are times where it's less necessary, but having that communications and that ability to get the message out right now seems to me to be key.
Mm-hmm. And I agree with that, and I don't think we're talking about pulling back. I mean, I'm frankly supportive of what's in front of us. I think it's just something to run concurrently with this conversation, that it's a well of funds that will always be the go-to until it's gone, right? And there could be an opportunity now to make a long-term decision for some portion of funds where we do end up with, you know, even if it's $250,000 and some kind of, again, I don't know what it is, but if there's a long-term thing that comes up in the economic development plans today, I'd hope we'd think about that for some of these funds too. Yes.
First, Heather, I just want to thank you. I think, you know, you have really made this position into a real asset for the city, and you've really, when we look at the accomplishments since you arrived on the scene, it's really phenomenal. So thank you for your work. I'm interested in understanding how you see this now, not necessarily a department, but a budgeted resource allocation for the city, how that fits with the vision around affordability and maintaining our diversity, because one of the things I fear is that there's we may see economic development move forward in such a way that we miss opportunities to ensure that it's done so in a manner that sort of maintains that vision that we have for having an affordable, diverse city. And so when I see, I'm just wondering how the strategic plan might address those issues. The Housing Commission, which I know you all discussed last meeting, I'm still not clear how because we're hot, I fear that there's going to be a lot of activity, and we'll wake up 2 to 3 years from now and sort of be like, oh, we're a totally different city, and there's a lot of strength and assets there, but we also maybe lost something along the way.
That's the whole reason that the economic development plan was so essential to me from the minute that I walked in. I think that as a city, certainly there have been a lot of smart choices made here, and by a lot of smart people over time. But there are pieces of sheer luck that market forces haven't driven it into some potentially unfortunate places. So that's something that was, for me, minute one, to have a plan to be addressing all of that. That's part of the reason that housing is written very specifically into the RFP for Camoin. So I guess I think of myself not as a community development person or an economic development person. I'm a community economic development person. So those two mindsets come into play on every single thing that I do. So that's how I personally perceive it being that way. And putting together that plan and using community involvement to do that really ensures that we're moving in the direction that's not Heather Carrington's image of the development of the future.
Right.
So it's through that plan.
Right. Thank you. For me, especially looking at some things around communications, it would send an important signal to have some language in there about ensuring that that this person's reaching out to broad stakeholders, and we're paying attention to the language issues, and so that having somebody focused on communications, it's about engaging that broad spectrum of our community, just to continue to reinforce that's something that we pay attention to.
Absolutely.
And I think recognizing that that's an asset in the marketing that we do around our city.
Right.
As well.
Right. My daughter's yearbook we just got last, and it's like the most amazing, beautiful thing. It's like, for Vermont, and I just think that is our marketing strategy as far as I'm concerned.
Our strength is our people.
Yeah.
When we went around and did the site visit with the economic development consultant, the result of that day for me was turning and looking to our consultants and saying, I've just realized that that's it. It's our people.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So one thing that's come up consistently, we've talked about a communications position, is support for our commissions, which is not included in this. And I'm assuming that's intentional and not part of the position, is designed.
Yeah, I think that the professional services for the planning facilitation are probably more where that resides.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're looking at they're different skill sets.
Yeah.
And I think that you need to honor that they're different skill sets as opposed to putting too many hats on one person where they don't have the expertise to do what they're being asked to do.
Yeah. I'll agree with the notation that we're asking department heads to do that right now, which is
Understood.
also not their specialty. So from a long-term perspective, it's just another box that exists.
No, completely understood.
Yeah.
I wear hats, lots of them, and they
Yeah.
aren't necessarily all my area of expertise.
Yeah.
I think part of that also needs to be guidance from staff and through the council to the commissions about charges. And as we think about developing Heather's work and the citywide master plan, how we task commissions with very specific parts of that through the planning commission, I think will help ease some of those support requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And that's work we need to do and bring to you.
Yeah. Because I think, it's similar to going back to that same concept as we're trying to build collaborative processes where the residents are feeding into it, which is what's great about the idea of the planning piece.
Mm-hmm.
When we have that, it's important that we try to honor it and feed it so we don't have individuals sitting in offices making decisions. It's a collaborative community conversation, which is how our last plan probably got written, I think. This was noted. Okay. Other questions, comments, concerns? Questions, comments from the public? Yes.
I just would say, having Heather in her position has been such an incredible asset to the WCP. We are incredibly grateful for all her hard work. It's been amazing, the relationship we have with the city now that Heather is in her position. And it's been so great. And in terms of the communications coordinator, again, from our perspective, having somebody who can communicate solely, whose job it is to solely communicate about things like the new branding and the parking situation would be a huge asset in terms of our downtown, particularly since we already have this issue with nobody knows anything about how to park in the city, and that's what I spend half of my job talking about, which I'm totally fine with because you're totally on top of that situation, I understand. But so as an organization, we would certainly advocate for communications coordinator at the city level, and having a strategic plan for communications, in our opinion, is paramount for success.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions, comments from the public? Great job, and all the way around. We certainly don't get an opportunity to say it enough, but it really is astounding the work and the resources you brought to the table in your time here. So we really appreciate all the work that you've done and the thoughtfulness that's gone into all of this. So great job. 2 years ago, we all decided this was a focus, is trying to get somebody in there to make sure we weren't just going along for the ride and just going on with luck. So we really appreciate all the thinking that's being done and all the resources you brought to the table. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks for letting me
Thanks,
do it.
guys.
So, Kirsty, you can just shut that projector off. So we did not, it's your
No,
meeting.
no, that's okay.
Just
We
charging
wrapped up
on
the community development. We'll go on to the TIF budget.
So we did not do a presentation for the TIF budget because it's not the same kind of operational area. I do want to I purposely put these two back to back because of this shift of 400,000 to 300,000 payment to the WCP. So to just put a few more words around that. Again, that is a repayment that the TIF is making, as the mayor alluded to earlier, to us. As you can see in the TIF budget presented and proposed, we are in a deficit position right now with the TIF. We still have significant reserves, and our long-term projections through 2024 are very healthy and strong. But given that we are facing this year deficit, we felt it was much more important to keep those dollars in the TIF budget than to move them into a reserve fund within the WCP. Sorry, no,
CDC.
within the CDC. sorry.
Now you got another $100,000.
Yeah, there you go. You got,
So that was a very conscious decision Heather and Angela and I made last week. That repayment plan is still there. So at some point in the future between now and 2024, that $100,000 will migrate back from the TIF to the CDC. We just chose this year to leave it in the TIF to protect that fund a little bit. So as you see the proposed FY18 TIF budget in front of you, so the other significant change to this budget, other than the CDC move, is that we are doubling our budgeted amount for legal fees. Last year we budgeted about 22,000. We're currently projected to spend around 50,000 this fiscal year. So we're upping that budget to 40,000.
Why? I'm just joking. Sorry. Sorry. Bad joke.
Late in the night. And then there is some realities that we're trying to account for about potential. We have a ground lease that's currently not being paid upon. So we are envisioning some reduction in revenue there. That's about it. Questions? Comments? Anything you want to add, Angela?
Right now.
because you have no voice or because you have no...
Angela's another spreadsheet that's really great, the TIF projection spreadsheet, if you ever really want to do a deep dive. And
I'm actually going to be revising it because there's a lot of nested sheets in there for past development, and I want to start where we are now and move forward with future projections. Now that I have some concrete numbers with debt repayments and some amortization schedules for the CDC note and the PCOR note.
But just from, again, not a qualified individual, but from many qualified individuals review, we've done a great job of being very conservative in our analysis and repayments, and have historically taken that route, and appreciate that this also represents the same. So,
and just to, again, a few more words around that, and Angela won't brag about it, is her cash flow projections through 2024 that have us coming out with full repayment, including almost $1 million in surplus, assume the growth we currently have. So don't assume a hotel, don't assume Lot D, don't assume some of the other development we anticipate coming online.
They don't assume things like city lights.
Right.
So things that we know are going to be completed, and there are other projected builds. So the entire TIF district does go to the railroad tracks. I know there is another development next door to CCB that's proposed, and a few other things that are down the line that just aren't built into that tax revenue.
So we are being very conservative and still in a very good position with very conservative analysis.
Nice.
Well done.
questions about the tax increment finance district's budget? Council? Any questions or concerns from the public? So seeing and hearing none, this is the final item on tonight's budget. I entertain or on tonight's agenda.
We added one.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sure, we have O.
So we will now address O. Pardon me. Thank you very much. Thank you for all your work, Angela, too, to balance that. All right. So we'll move on to item O, which we will refer to as
Call it TIF reserve request.
yeah. Allocation of funds for city lights.
So again, this is the late item added. I did send you an email earlier, not too much earlier today, with some information about this, but this is an issue that really arose very late last week and over the weekend, and we felt like it was very important to bring it to you. So the challenge here is City Lights is on track to open right around July 1st. It's a really exciting project with a developer who's interested in doing a lot of work in Winooski. The plans as approved back March 2016 very clearly show a concrete sidewalk around the City Lights 106 East Allen property. As you know, the standard construction in the downtown core is pavers, the red brick pavers, which is a much more expensive installation. So the contractor has been carrying the budget to do the concrete sidewalk We are now, just having caught this, really pushing him to install the pavers to keep the standard for the downtown core. Our concern is if we don't follow through with this standard at this point, it's going to become the new standard, and we're going to quickly see our paver sidewalk deteriorate to concrete sidewalks and be disjointed and a deteriorated aesthetic. Additionally, this is thinking about the success of the TIF district, thinking about the adoption of the form-based code and our growing focus on our gateway districts. This intersection of Abenaki Way and East Allen is really the focal point of that, just as the Strand here on Main Street is that focal point of that interaction between the Gateway Corridor and downtown. This will be the new focal point of East Allen coming into the downtown, and we want it to pop. We want it to set the standard of what that Gateway Corridor looks like moving forward. So the challenge here is the developer has a approved project to install a different standard. We are asking him to very quickly adapt and install a higher level of standard, and we believe we need to share the cost with him since he does have a permitted project for something else. So we are requesting for discussion today the use of TIF reserves. It is in the TIF district, between $35,000 and $60,000, and we haven't gone through the bid process. We will do that before the next meeting and give you a finite number to help him get that work done. So the idea is that he will contribute the amount he's been carrying in his budget for the sidewalk work. We will subsidize the rest. We think at this point the most effective way to do this is to have his contractor actually do the work, and then we will reimburse him for that work.
We're correcting a mistake we made.
It's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah. If it makes you feel better, let's take that number by the projected net tax revenue on the property.
Let's do that.
That's the spoonful of medicine.
So not on obviously is we'll get a final amount next time, but anybody have issue with this course of action? I think it's staff doing a great job working out a solution with somebody who I can imagine a project like this one's coming down. Those costs can mean actually quite a bit, but also quite frankly, we had an error here. It feels like we should probably do our part to correct. Any issue with that from anybody?
No, I think everything you said is correct. That's going to be the focal point of folks driving into the town. I think it's a necessity, not an option at this point.
Questions, concerns from council? Questions, concerns from the public? Great. So seeing and hearing none, okay to move forward, and we'll look forward to the final amount. And with that, we've completed tonight's agenda, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
We adjourn.
Motion adjourned by Brian Sweeney. Second by Brian Corrigan. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And those opposed, motion carries.
Okay, so hold on, Angela, because I'm gonna rebut something. My very first meeting in City Hall, Winooski,